This is the first film camera I ever used, albeit at first it was just a prop for some digital photos because I thought it looked cool, but luckily a couple years later I did realise that this piece of mechanical machinery is actually capable of shooting photos. Even though capable is probably an understatement, it's really good in my opinion.
Won't she turn around? Won't she look at me? Oh, please. Won't she notice me?
So this is the Pentax K1000, a fully mechanical SLR camera, so that means it doesn't require a battery to shoot, and this camera is what began this wonderful journey of mine that expanded the medium of photography for me from only digital to now also, since 2 or so years, analog. And so I now also identify as one of those film photographers. And you know, film photographers have a certain tendency when it comes to cameras. They collect them. And so did I. Over the past 2 years, I've been on a bargain hunt for cheap film cameras to add to my growing collection that is currently at 10 cameras, and in this video I want to present that collection to you. While this video is of course a lot about simply appreciating the art of this technology, I also want this to be a sort of informative video for beginners in film photography. I regularly get comments or messages from beginners who are motivated to start shooting but have no idea where to start because there are just so many cameras to choose from, and I absolutely understand that this range of choices can be quite overwhelming. And therefore I think this video might be a good place to start. I'm going to present each camera in chronological order of me getting it and talk briefly about what makes it unique and show you some example pictures, which I hope can at least point you in the right direction to start looking for your film camera. And as the title suggests, this video is budget friendly. Not all cameras, but many definitely are, so with that said, let's return to the Pentax K1000, my very first film camera. This Pentax K1000 belonged to my dad. He bought it back in the days when he was travelling a lot and he wanted to bring along a good kit to photographically document his trips. Shortly after I was born, however, the camera industry was strongly shifting in favour of digital cameras, and so the Pentax one day was stored in a cupboard and it stayed there. For a while. Like over 15 years I think, until one day I found it, and the rest of the story you already know. So the Pentax is a mechanical SLR, which means it's fully manual and you do not require a battery to shoot it. It does however take a battery which powers the light meter, but I meter light externally, so I've never tried it out. What I personally think makes the Pentax stand out is the build quality. This camera feels so sturdy, and I have actually smashed it on the ground before.
Holy no.
And it survived. I think it's even quite well known how durable this model is. And so even after 9 more cameras, this still remains my favourite camera in my collection. The price of the Pentax is not quite as low as some other examples in this video, but it's not terribly high either. I've found offers at around €100, sometimes lower and more often higher. Lastly, here are some shots I got with it. This is the second camera in my collection, a Minolta Riva Zoom 70W. After playing around with the Pentax and completely falling in love with the process of film photography, my mum remembered that she must have her old cameras stored away somewhere as well. She went looking for them and came back with a shoebox, and inside were 3 cameras, this Minolta being one of them. The Minolta is a simple point shoot camera that I'd describe as a bit more of a modern camera than the Pentax. It's electrical, so you'll need a battery to power it up, and it's completely automatic. There is barely anything that you can adjust here, and with barely, I mean you can choose to flash or not to flash. It has a wonderful zoom lens attached that goes from 28 to 70mm, and it is pretty sharp, I must say. I don't really give much attention to this kind of stuff with the lenses, but I just remember being surprised how sharp the photos came out. So what makes this camera unique to me is its hyper-automatic nature, which I love to use when I'm not trying to get the best shot, but instead want to stay in the moment of whatever I'm doing and still be able to capture good photos. One thing I don't like too much about it is the tiny viewfinder, which I find hard to use at times, but apart from that, using this camera is always a joy. This one is a bit cheaper. I've found it for around 30 to 35 euros, which I'd say qualifies it as a budget film camera. Here are some more shots that I've got with it. The two other cameras my mum had in that shoebox were a broken Fujifilm point and shoot, so I didn't take that, and this Olympus XA3. The Olympus XA3 is a semi-automatic rangefinder camera, but stylistically I'd say it's quite close to a point and shoot. My mum got this from her dad and now it's been passed on to me, and so I'm happy my mum found this because I love it. So what's special about this camera in my opinion is that it's semi-automatic and a rangefinder, so it exposes automatically just like a point and shoot, but unlike point and shoots you do have to rate your ISO manually, which is great because that means you can slightly control the exposure. This allows me to overexpose my film, which is necessary at times, especially when shooting expired film. Also, this camera does not have autofocus, unlike the Minolta Riva Zoom. It has a zone focus system with 3 zones to choose from. I kind of like this, but at the same time I'm still so terrible at using it and hence get a lot of blurry shots at times. I just keep forgetting to set it to the right zone. The last special feature of this camera is the lens. It has a 35mm f3.5 prime lens, which is great for me because I love the 35mm focal length. This one is a bit more expensive again. I've found a couple offers at about 100 euros. Anyway, I'm very happy to have this in my collection. Here are some more shots from this camera. This is a Mamiya 1000 TL and it is yet another camera that I was gifted. This used to belong to my girlfriend's granddad, and same story here, he didn't need it anymore and was going to get rid of it, but luckily my girlfriend saved it and his whole kit came to me. This is another SLR, very similar to the Pentax K1000, however I can't say so much about this one because sadly this camera turned out to need some repairing. The shutter releases, however it seems to get stuck at some areas, and so the shutter speeds aren't accurate and sometimes only half of the frame actually gets exposed. I made a whole video of that morning when I went out to try out this camera and got some decent results and some lesser decent shots. Looking for the price, I couldn't find this exact model, but similar Mamiya cameras seem to be priced anywhere from 50 to 100 euros. Speaking of similar Mamiya cameras, I was disappointed that the Mamiya 1000 TL wasn't working properly, therefore I went on the search for the same or a similar camera and came across a Mamiya 500 TL. So this is basically the same camera, but that's why I bought it. Me being the bargain hunter I am, I got this for 25 euros or somewhere around there. However, Mamiya and I just don't seem to want to work. I got the camera and at first the shutter released, but then it stopped and started again, and overall it seemed very inconsistent. And so for the past year or so it has been stored away together with the other Mamiya. However, for this video I got it out again and tried it again, and at the moment it seems to be working. I'm not sure however which shutter speeds are accurate because at 1 second the shutter got stuck again, but faster shutter speeds seem to be fine, so I'll have to give this one another chance. The Mamiya 1000 TL had a great feature that I wanted, however now of course still didn't have, and that is a built-in self-timer. And so I continued my search for cheap cameras on the second-hand market and stumbled across a Zenith E. So apart from the cameras that I've been gifted, I think this one is the cheapest deal that I've ever gotten. I bought this camera for 10 euros. The Zenith E is another SLR that, like the Pentax K1000, is fully mechanical and it is known to be robust. Therefore, I had high hopes that this camera is fully functional, and it is. The shutter speeds all work and seem to be accurate, and the self-timer works fine. There is just one minor issue, which is the viewfinder. Something the seller didn't warn me about is a weird mark or stain of sort in the middle of the viewfinder. It's a little annoying, but hasn't interfered with my photography, so I enjoy using it nevertheless, especially when I know that I want to use the self-timer. The price of the Zenith E seems to be all over the place, but I actually found another one for 10 euros. Then, before we move on to the next camera, here is a quick ad break. Yes, so I've finally got a print shop, and so if you like my work and want to decorate your home or your office or something, then you might find something that you like there. Anyway, let's get back to the cameras. Then, the next camera on this list I didn't really buy for a specific reason. I think I was just looking for a different option for my M4 II lenses for when I wasn't really feeling like using the brick that is the Zenith E. And also, if I see a really good price on an SLR, I get tempted, and so I got this. The Praktica Super TL1000 is yet another SLR that is basically the same as the Pentax K1000, except that it doesn't feel as sturdy and is generally cheaper. I've found this for pretty low prices, down to 22 euros. I can't say much about it actually, it's a simple, cheap SLR, nothing fancy, but it works. I've used it quite a bit actually. Next up is the EXA IHG Dresden, which is a special one. It's quite fancy actually. I was super intrigued by the design and its age, and coincidentally found it for a good price. So what's unique about this camera is first of all the viewfinder, which flips up so that you look inside from above. The image is flipped, therefore it is quite tricky to set up a composition, so this is definitely a camera for slow shooting. Another unique part I like a lot about this camera is the shutter dial, because it's not a dial. Instead you have this lever that only gives you these few shutter speeds. It's a fine part of the collection. I don't use it as much as the others, but every time I do, it is quite the experience. The price of this one is a bit higher than the cheapest on this list, but not exorbitant. Here are some shots I got with this camera. Then, the one before last camera on this list is yet another SLR, in fact it's another Praktica. This is a Praktica MTL5B, which is basically the same camera as the other Praktica, but with a self-timer. I was still not entirely happy with the Zenith E and wanted to try out another camera that has a self-timer if I happen to come across a cheap offer. And so this camera joined the collection. I don't remember for what price I found it, but probably it must have been about 20 or 30 euros max. At a quick glance, however, I found most offers to be at the 50 to 100 euro range. There's not much to say about this camera. It's another one that I describe as a cheaper, less robust version of the Pentax K1000, but it has a special feature, the self-timer. And that timer worked great, as you might remember from this video from last summer. However, you might also remember that this camera had a different issue, but that is one that is easier to fix than malfunctioning shutters, I think. I was getting light leaks, so probably I need to renew the seals and then it should be fine. Anyway, let's move on to the last camera of the collection, which is another one that I was gifted. Last summer, my mum and my sister went to Japan to visit my grandmother, and at one point during the time of their trip, my sister sent me a photograph of a point-and-shoot camera asking whether I'd like to have it. The camera belonged to my grandfather, who had passed away not so long ago, and my grandmother was decluttering the household and was going to get rid of this camera, but then she remembered that her grandson might like it. I got super excited because it was one of those silver Olympus point-and-shoots that I'd been eyeing, but I never came across one for a good price. The Olympus Mu2 170 VF. So this camera is actually just a point-and-shoot, but it's a pretty wild one. It's weather resistant and it has a zoom lens that goes from 38mm to 170mm. It was only later that I found out that these Olympus Mu cameras are quite hyped for some reason, not as much as something like a Contax T2, but still the prices are high. However, this exact model of mine is not a classic Mewtwo, which I believe is equipped with a 35mm f2.8 lens. Mine, as said, has this crazy zoom lens. However, I had a hard time finding this exact model online. On eBay, I found one that is sold in Japan and it costs $174. So this is the one camera in my collection that definitely does not qualify as budget. So I appreciate all the more my luck that my grandmum thought of me before throwing out this camera. Anyway, I haven't had it for long yet, so I've only shot 2 or so rolls with it, but those at least turned out great. Here are some shots. And that wraps up this video. That was my budget, or mostly budget, film camera collection. If you're a beginner, I hope this was helpful and could point you in the right direction on your search for your first film camera. And if you're not a beginner and just appreciate old cameras like I do, then I'm happy that you found this video and I hope you enjoyed it. That's it for this week. Before saying goodbye, I just want to quickly shout out the lovely community that is supporting me on Patreon. Big thank you and much love to each one of you. If you're interested in Lightroom presets, extra videos, or physical postcards, you can check out my Patreon via the link in the description. With that said, I look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, goodbye.